So we're going to switch.
And then I just do this.
Or you can use that. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're really excited to have this, our first ever workshop on textiles, the truth about textiles. But before we get going this morning, there's just a couple of announcements. First of all, restrooms are out this door and to the left. So for those of you who haven't been here before, the other thing I am tasked with letting you know in the event of an alarm sounding, you exit these doors and go down the stairs. The elevators would not be operational. And then you cross the street and there's a park across the way called Cesar Chavez Park. And that is the meeting place just in the event of an alarm sounding. So hopefully that won't happen to us today. So I'm really excited. We have a fantastic selection of speakers today who are experts in a lot of fields as it relates to textiles. We'll be covering sustainable manufacturing and design in panel 1, textile collection methods in panel 2, and then all about reduce, reuse, repair, and recycling in panel 3. And we'll also have a speaker who's going to be talking about textile policies around the world. My purpose today is just to set the table in very broad terms to bring everyone up to speed. Hi, Joanne. So we all have a good understanding of the enormous quantity of textiles that are being consumed as well as their impacts. I'll be touching just very briefly on trends, as I'll leave that for our very esteemed panelists today. And I highly encourage you all to stay through the entire day, as this afternoon we'll be having what we term a World Cafe, and that's basically where we have some questions that we're each going to be working on together in groups and coming up with recommendations, and we're going to be taking those to move forward with whatever sorts of strategy that we're developing to go forward in the future. So I really encourage everyone to stay with us through the day. This is just the beginning of our work to tackle this issue, and we can't do it alone. It's going to take all of us in this room and more to make progress. And this, to us, to the whole recycling textile working group, is a very exciting first step for us. So thank you for being here. And now I'll just talk briefly about some facts regarding textiles. So the textile industry, as many of you know, is enormous. Its global fashion and apparel is valued at over $3 trillion annually. It takes over 70 million barrels of oil to make the polyester used in this clothing, and a quarter of all chemicals applied worldwide are used in the production of agriculturally derived material feedstocks. Here's some of the environmental impacts. 85% of the human-made material found on shorelines are microfibers, and they match the types of material such as nylon, acrylic, used in clothing. People around the world consume about 5 grams of plastic each week, or about the weight of a credit card, according to a recent Australian report. The World Bank estimates up to 20% of industrial water pollution is caused by textile dyeing and finishing treatments. Some 72 toxic chemicals have been identified in water solely from textile dyeing, 30 of which cannot be removed. It takes 1,800 gallons of water to make 1,800 gallons of water to grow the cotton to make 1 pair of jeans, and 700 gallons of water and a third a pound of chemicals to make a cotton t-shirt. Textiles have been, I'm sure a lot of us have heard, quoted widely as being the second most polluting industry just below oil and gas, and that accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions. In another 30 years, it's forecast that the fashion industry will use 25% of the carbon budget. So much excess clothing is being made and discarded worldwide that every second a garbage truck's worth of textiles is being landfilled or buried. So fast fashion, a lot of us have heard this term, but I thought I'd share with you a couple of definitions. The one on the screen is from Merriam-Webster. I thought a little bit more colorful one is actually from The Economist. For many shoppers, An irresistible offer. Trendy clothing at astonishingly low prices. The result is a new and even faster kind of fast fashion, which encourages consumers to buy heaps of items, discard them after a few wears, and then come back for another batch of brand new outfits. The result, the average US consumer buys 60% more clothing items per year and keeps them half as long as they did 15 years ago. Taking a longer view on consumption, in the 1980s, 12 articles of clothing per year was the average consumption, versus now 68 pieces a year, and half of those items are only worn 3 to 4 times. Fast fashion and the disposable culture are also hurting sorting companies that export secondhand clothing. These fast fashion, cheaply made clothing pieces aren't made to be durable, and so they have little value on the secondhand market. And on the right of this slide is the opposite of fast fashion. Some of you might have been wondering, why is Emma Watson on this slide? Well, what she's doing is demonstrating fashion that is the opposite of fast fashion. This was a collaboration with Calvin Klein, part of Olivia Firth's ongoing project, the Green Carpet Challenge, and with EcoAge. The stunning Emma on the red carpet at the Met Ball in a look crafted by the incredible team at Calvin Klein. This 5-piece look is created from 3 fabrics woven from yarns, all made with recycled plastic bottles. The zippers are made from recycled materials. The inner bustier has been created using organic cotton. This beautiful look was designed to be repurposed for future use. The pants can be worn on their own. The train can be used for another red carpet event. This is considered the ultimate 30 wears. Not surprisingly, the United States is the largest importer of clothing. 98% of what we buy is imported. And as many of us know, the online or e-commerce has an increasingly large share of the market. In 2018, fashion e-commerce accounted for 20% of total fashion retail sales, totaling $102 billion. Projections show sales up to $146 billion by 2023. In the US, we average about $2,000 a year spent on textiles. By the way, people who live in Manhattan spend the most on clothing at about $362 a month. 1 billion items a year are imported from China alone. So we'll touch on the human costs. We can't talk about textiles without doing that. Fast fashion is made overseas by manufacturers where clothing is made under conditions completely unacceptable here in the United States. Bangladesh has more than 5,000 garment factories, handling orders for nearly all of the world's top brands and retailers. It has become an export powerhouse second only to China, largely by delivering lower costs, in part by having the lowest wages in the world for garment workers. The majority of the garment workers in Bangladesh earn little more than the minimum wage, far below what is considered a living wage, which would be the minimum required to provide a family with food, shelter, and education. Many are forced to work 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, with some workers finishing at 3 a.m., only to start again in the morning at 7:30. On top of this, workers face unsafe, cramped, and hazardous conditions, which often lead to injuries and factory fires. Since 1990, at least 400 workers have died in factory fires, with several thousand more injured. CalRecycle and CalEPA, we hosted a showing of the true cost a couple of months ago. As many of you might have already seen it, it's a 2015 documentary film chronicling the conditions under which clothing is made. Discusses several aspects of the garment industry and its after effects, such as river and soil pollution, pesticide contamination, disease, and death. It examines consumerism and mass media, ultimately linking them to global capitalism. And of course, one tragedy the movie highlights is the Rana garment factory building collapse. On April 24th, 2013, after ignoring worker concerns over large cracks in the building, workers were in the building when it collapsed, and 1,132 people were killed, with another 2,500 injured. It's the deadliest disaster in the history of the garment industry. So CalRecycle, what's our definition of textiles? They're items made of thread, yarn, fabric, and cloth. It includes clothes, fabric trimmings, draperies, and all natural and synthetic cloth fibers. However, our definition of textiles does not include furniture, mattresses, leather shoes, bags, or belts. We found that textiles was the 6th most prevalent material type in the waste stream in California. Californians spend about $70 million a year to landfill 1.24 million tons of clothes and other fabrics. Buried textiles account for about 5% of all landfill space in California. And it's the 3rd most prevalent material type in the multifamily residential disposed waste. We also conducted a while back a recyclability study and found that fully 95% of the disposed textiles were reusable or recyclable. However, once they are commingled, they're garbage. On average, 82 pounds of textiles are thrown away per person. So this is our current donation system. Many people are surprised to learn that charities don't sell everything that comes into their bins. A charity sells about 10 to 15%, brokers buy the remainder. 30% on average are made into wiping cloths, 20% are converted into fibers, 45% or almost half are sent overseas, with 5% being garbage. So obviously, thrift stores can't sell it all. There are some silver linings, however. Dozens of digital startups are fueling re-commerce, the fastest growing category in fashion retail, as traditional merchants are looking at the potential of the pre-owned market. Secondhand clothing sales are expected to double from $29 billion to $51 billion by 2023. Secondhand sales are forecast to outpace fast fashion sales within the next decade and reach $64 billion by 2028, or $20 billion more than the estimated fast fashion sales for that year. So there are some silver linings. I'll just touch quickly on some trends as we're going to be hearing more from our panelists today. So it has been exciting to see more recently some voluntary take-back programs from consumer brands. High-profile companies such as H&M, Levi's, and Adidas now have programs that involve vouchers and other incentives for participating consumers. Patagonia offers a second life for its products through repair and deconstruction, and there's been other consumer brands that have followed suit with return programs for items such as razors by Gillette razors and disposable contact lenses from Bausch & Lomb and Johnson & Johnson. But today we're going to be hearing from many experts in the field about cutting-edge trends in the industry and new approaches to tame this glut of textiles. I did want to end on a high note. Maxine Bedat, I believe, is the founder and director of the New Standard Institute, and prior to that, Maxine co-founded and was the CEO of the fashion company Zadie. For its work in sustainability, Zadie was named one of the world's most innovative companies in retail by Fast Fashion. And I really wanted to share this quote with you as it speaks to me, because sometimes things may seem bleak and that we don't have control. However, as this quote shows, that's far from the truth. The clothing we choose to wear every day has an enormous impact on the planet and its people. Our clothing can either continue to be a major part of the problem, or it can be an enormous part of getting our planet on track. The choice is ultimately ours. We can vote at the ballot box for strong climate measures and vote at the cash register for clean clothes. And there's my contact information, and of course it was with the announcement as well if anyone would like to communicate about these issues. Are we going to entertain questions?
Right now? If anyone has a few.
So my question is,
I'm sorry, we have to give you a microphone.
Oh, that's right. Or I can read.
My question is, are the slides going to be available? Because that is a lot of great information. I couldn't take notes. I'm sure other people are wondering as well.
Yes, for all of our presentations, we will be posting those on the internet shortly. So thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I meant to say that.
Thank you. Hi there. My name is B. I'm at DTSC, but this is actually an area that I have a lot of interest and research in. And one of the things that I would caution is equating overseas with bad. China specifically has some of the most rigorously tested facilities. They have really strict certification standards for like RAP certification, things like that. And so I would also remind us all that we, as state employees, the ones who are state employees, also have quite a lot of slave labor in the CalPIA, the Prison Industrial Authority. They're paid pennies for manufacturing our furniture, a lot of stuff that we have and use every day. And so, again, I would really strongly caution us from saying that anything that's made overseas or imported is negative, especially while skipping over what we're doing to make things in our own state and our own, industry really negative as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that comment.
You said there was a repository for textiles. Where would you find those places? You had shown a slide and it had all these textiles and that were being recycled. Did I misunderstand that image?
Was it this slide? I think I'm sorry. If I understand.
One before this, the one there. The donation system.
Right.
These are parsed out to what different
Correct.
fibers?
Correct. So charities sell about 10 to 15% of the materials that they receive. And then brokers, actually independent brokers, buy about 80% of the materials that come in, and 5% are garbage. And then about 30% of those materials are what we call downcycled into wiping cloths, and then another 20% are made into fibers for carpet padding, insulation, pillows, cushions, stuffings, and then the rest is sent overseas.
And where are these repositories?
Generally,
Oh.
charities that get clothing like big
Right, thank you. I
place. Yeah.
Right. So I think what we're talking about here is that the individual charities, such as Goodwill or the Salvation Army or whomever, they're the ones that are processing and receiving this material.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, sorry I wasn't clear. I think we need to move. Oh, do we have another?
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
I know you said that 95% is recyclable. Would you consider sending something overseas where it could ultimately be landfilled or disrupt a local economy there, recycling it? Is that?
Well, I think what we found is through the recyclability study is that prior to being commingled with other things and becoming dirty, that those materials, those textiles were actually in a clean, complete state, and they could be reused or worn, or in fact, in many cases, they still had tags on them. So I don't think we necessarily spoke to exactly where they would wind up, but just that those materials, the 85% of textiles that get thrown away every year, that actually 95% of them in the state they were in prior to being deposited in the garbage were actually reusable or recyclable.
Thanks.
Thank you. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Kate Wilkins, who is a member of our Textiles Action Team, and she will be moderating the first panel and helping us with all of our IT needs.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So quick overview of the agenda. Tracy Harper just presented our overview. We're having 3 panels. This first panel I'm really excited about, kind of around sustainable manufacturing and design. Then that'll be followed by textile collection methods. We'll have lunch, go to our panel 3 and then textile policy in our World Cafe. So for our panel 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each speaker before they present. They have about 10 minutes to make a presentation, kind of talk about their business, what they're interested in, these problems that we're discussing, and we're going to move through those 3 speakers, and then the remaining time we're going to have for audience questions. So please hold your questions, and I'm hoping to allot at least 20 to 30 minutes for that, and if we don't get to you, we can figure out how to get to your questions after that. So starting first, we have Trini Gatner, who joined Textile Exchange in 2019 to lead the review process of 5 standards that were gifted to the Textile Exchange in 2018. So for the past couple of years, Trini has played a key role in the development of fair trade standards across the agricultural and apparel and home goods space. The apparel and textile space has always carried a special place in her heart, and she is eager to co-create its future. So Trini is going to be speaking on Textile Exchange's recycled standards, as well as the role standards play in increasing uptake of preferred fibers. There you go. And you will hit the base of that to turn it on. Perfect.
Good morning, everybody. Is that better? Yes. Fantastic. Let me get... Perfect. So thank you very much for having us. I'm here with Textile Exchange, and I'm very excited to talk to you about our recycled standards today. So I'm going to touch on every topic fairly fast since I only have 10 minutes, but the slides will be shared. There's a lot of information on there, as well as our email address, so you can follow up with questions as needed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do, about preferred fibers and the role of standards. I'll give you a quick introduction to our recycled standards. I'll talk a little bit about definitions, and then recycled material verification at the end. So Textile Exchange is a nonprofit that was founded in 2002, so 17 years ago, with the initial focus on organic cotton. We have around 300 plus members representing brands, retailers, suppliers around the globe. And since 2010, we expanded our focus a little bit from organic cotton to include other fibers such as lyocell, recycled polyester, and to offer another approach for brands and retailers there. We're a small but mighty organization with around 30 staff across 11 countries. And our mission is to inspire and equip people to accelerate sustainable practices in the textile value chain. And our goal is on focusing to minimize the harmful impacts of the global textile industry and maximizing its positive effects. We hope and envision that a global textile industry will eventually protect and restore the environment and enhances lives. So we do multiple different things in the industry, from benchmarking to tools and practices, industry reports, and I'll touch on some of them a little bit, but my main focus today is to talk to you about standards and certification, which is one thing that we do. This is a quick snapshot. It's always nice to connect faces and names to organizations. This is my integrity team, which I am a part of. We're 9 people, standards and assurance, and we're operating across 5 different countries. So first, let's talk about preferred fibers and the role of standards. I'm going to give you a little bit of a backdrop and then why standards are relevant, and then talk to you more about our standards. So some of you may know, we have lately released a preferred fiber and materials market report in 2019, which has revealed that global fiber production has doubled in the last 20 years. And in 2018, we've reached an all-time high of 107 million metric tons of production. And by 2030, fiber production is expected to grow another 104 to 145 million metric tons. So now is really the time to do and act to accelerate the growth of preferred fibers and materials and to embrace the innovations that are out there today. And standards will offer you one tool to tackle this. It gives you the opportunity to verify that using the materials or preferred materials are better for the world. And they also give you the opportunity to gain confidence that what you ultimately, or the claims you ultimately make, are traced throughout the system, and that your final product indeed has recycled content in your product. So backstep a little bit, voluntary standard, like I said, is a market-driven tool that can drive lasting change. It can address the most pressing social issues, environmental issues that are out there today. And it can also make an impact in contexts where legal protections are weak. So just for framing, I think it's important that a voluntary standard is separate from the legal framework. So on the screen now you see the 6 different standards that we have. And I will talk to you about the middle ones in blue, which are our recycled standard. Just a quick snapshot. We also have the content claim standard, the organic content standard, and then our 2 animal fiber standards, the responsible down and the responsible wool standard. So I'll run you through the goals, the scope, and the certified sites for the recycled standard. And in a nutshell, the goal of the 2 standards, I will speak to you a little bit in acronyms because our standards name are a little bit long. So the Global Recycled Standard, I will abbreviate to GRS, and the Recycled Claim Standard to RCS. And the goal of both the GRS and the RCS is to really move away from virgin material and to increase the use of recycled materials. And the GRS goes a little bit beyond in scope and in its goals by also wanting to eliminate the harm caused by the production. So it has additional requirements around social, environmental, and chemical. In terms of the scope, you see like a very, very simplified supply chain. The scope of both standards start at the recycling stage with the verification of the reclaimed material. And then the chain of custody goes all the way to the end product of the final garment. And the GRS and the RCS have the same scope, whereas for the GRS, the Global Recycled Standard, you have these additional criteria for social, environmental, and chemical. This slide shows you generally the growth of the standards and how many sites we have across the countries. And I think the most important takeaway here is the growth from 2018 to 2019 of 40% for the GRS and 36% for the RCS. Let's move into definitions a little bit. There's, just to give you examples and also pictures, when we talk about reclaimed materials, we're talking about material that would have otherwise been disposed of as waste or used for energy recovery, but has instead been collected and reclaimed as material input. So examples of that would be used clothing, used plastic bottles, fabric cutting waste, and off-spec products. Recycled materials are material that have been reprocessed from reclaimed materials during the manufacturing process. So examples of that could be the shredded fiber from the used clothing, polyester chip from used plastic bottles, shredded fiber from cutting waste. And then there are also 2 definitions that are important: pre-consumer material and post-consumer material. And examples of pre-consumer material, which is also often called post-industrial material, are fabric cutting waste and off-spec product. And then post-consumer material are used clothing and used plastic bottles. So let's look at the recycled material verification chain of custody. So I'm guiding you back to the 6 standards that we have, and you'll see that the content claim standard, the one on the left in orange, is really the backbone of our existing standards to ensure that the chain of custody is followed from start to finish to the final product. And here's a slide that you might all very well be aware of. On the left, you see everybody's dream. Ideally, we can really trace a final product or trace the contents of a final product back to its source. The reality looks a lot different, as you see on the right. A lot of times product gets traded, blended, moves around, so it is a lot harder to maintain its existence. Furthermore, when you look at this more simplified example, you can blend cotton with the recycled bottles, then you have a new fiber. It gets more complex the more fibers also change. But the ultimate goal of the standard is at the final garment you hold in your hand, you're able to verify the recycled content of X%. This is a rather technical yet fun, I always say, graph. It really shows you how our chain of custody works, which is the solution to maintain the tracing from the source to the final garment. And we do that by way of scope certificates and transaction certificates. So each entity along the chain is audited for scope. And then as the material travels throughout the supply chain, it is followed by a transaction certificate. And that is how you ensure that the forward product path is ensured, and suppliers can preserve their confidentiality or they may choose not to. And lastly, I want to leave you with some examples of industry commitments. Tracy already touched on some of them, and you will see in the presentation the hyperlinks guide you to more information. But H&M Group and IKEA have an ambition to become 100% circular and renewable by 2030 by way of use of recycled and renewable materials. Patagonia is moving more and more to 100% renewable and recycled raw materials. Volcom is committed to increase the share of recycled nylon to 20% by 2020, which is coming up soon. And Adidas is committed to using only recycled plastic by 2024. And there are multiple other brands. I just wanted to give you a quick highlight. And lastly, I want to leave you with my email address, or our email address, if you have any follow-up questions. And that is it. Thank you.
Training, before I move on, I had one follow-up question. So why are these certification standards important? You know, what does that help solve or do? Why are they important? Why are they important?
There. I think it's really important because they offer you one tool in the toolbox to verify claims that you're making and to ensure in a very confusing ecosystem of material traveling all over different places to actually verify the recycled content in the end. And to do so and be able to do so in very complex supply chains. And I touched on this a little bit about also the legality aspect. So laws always have to be followed in every country, no matter what a standard says. But a standard has the opportunity to go a little bit above a specific law in a specific country. So all our standards are globally applicable. So for areas that are really, really important, there is the opportunity in a standard to go above the law and say where the law, for example, is silent, do this anyway. So that's a really important tool, and the confidence for a brand or an entity in the supply chain to really be able to stand behind the claim and say, I stand behind this.
Thank you. Okay, and we are going to move on to our next speaker. So, and thank you, Trini, so much.
Sure.
Nikki Player joined Everlane 3 years ago as the Raw Material Research and Development Lead, where she oversees materials development and sustainable sourcing and innovation. She has supported the development of Everlane's sustainable denim collection, as well as Renew, Everlane's collection of outerwear and fleece made entirely from recycled water bottles, which coincided with its commitment to eliminate all virgin plastic from their supply chain by 2021. And then prior to Everlane, Nikki worked at Madewell for 7 years, leading their materials team and helping to relaunch their denim category. She has over 13 years of experience in raw materials, sustainable sourcing, and development. And right before I turn it over, if we have anyone watching online who has questions, please email auditorium@calepa.ca.gov. That's auditorium@calepa.ca.gov. Take it away, Nikki.
Can you hear me? Is that better? Okay, so let's see if I can get all of this going at once. I am from Everlane, and just to give a bit of background about our company, for those of you who may not be familiar, we were founded about, 8 years ago now on the principle of radical transparency. And we launched with a single product, a t-shirt. So our founder was from outside of the fashion industry. He was working in marketing and in business. And at the time, he really could not understand why buying a quality t-shirt cost so much. He felt that the apparel industry was very opaque, and he saw this as an opportunity to shed transparency on the industry. So we were founded with the hope to be able to expose the true cost of goods. We have since extended our transparency up the supply chain. We focused heavily on Tier 1, the factories, creating standards for high level of social compliance there. And more recently, we've pushed the focus as far back as we can, continuing the traceability and transparency to the fiber origin, both to support environmental and social initiatives throughout the supply chain. So again, just to recap, we were founded with radical transparency. In 2018, we made our commitment to eliminate virgin plastics. This we are hoping to achieve by 2021. And to further this end, we have been partnering closely with mills, primarily in Asia, to produce recycled polyester and nylon made from 100% certified recycled plastics. Building on what we just heard about, when setting out to research how we wanted to certify our materials, we knew we wanted a third-party certification to verify that everything was recycled. What we loved about the GRS certification was that it went above and beyond just the material content and did also touch on social compliance as well as some level of environmental standards throughout the supply chain. So to us, it felt like, a really nice marriage of principles that we were looking for. So all of our fabrics are GRS certified. And then as we've continued on our journey, really implementing a preferred fiber strategy has been key for us. One component being growing our presence of recycled raw materials. So for us, radical transparency has come to really mean opportunity for education of the consumer on all of our product. Oh, I keep forgetting about this, sorry, thank you. On all of our product pages, if you scroll to the bottom, we have this infographic where we list the cost of what it takes to make our product. We break it out with materials, hardware, labor, duties, and transportation. And what we're really hoping to do here is to give an opportunity for the consumer to stop and think about what it actually costs to make their clothes. I think in this current age of disposability and fast fashion, a lot of that connection to the product has been lost. And so we are trying to find as many touch points as we can throughout our communications to kind of bring it back to a reality and tangibility. We do not have a traditional sale strategy. We use what we call Choose What You Pay. And this is an event that we have both online and in person, approximately 2 to 3 times a year. And Choose What You Pay online looks like this. Again, we see it as another opportunity to show what happens when items go on discount. Because we do not create our margins to discount like a lot of other retailers do these days, we want to show that when we drop a price by a certain percentage, we're no longer able to cover certain aspects of our overhead. So you can hover on all of the different, we give you 3 options of price tiers, and you can hover on each one and see what we can no longer afford if you choose that option. To be completely honest, the majority of people still choose the lesser value, which is totally fine, but we do think that even if you're not choosing to pay the more expensive amount, it is still perhaps lingering inside your head of what you're no longer paying for. We also do not participate in Black Friday sales, but we use it as an opportunity to collect money and donate to a cause that aligns with our mission and values. We have done several partnerships over the years with our factories. We have given health insurance to our Los Angeles t-shirt factory employees. We have donated helmets to all of the employees at one of our Vietnam factories because the primary mode of transportation is via motorbike, and most of the employees were riding to and from work every day without helmets. We have donated funds to start a organic container garden, also in Vietnam at another factory. We've participated with Surfrider, and then this year we were very proud to partner with Oceana. So our Renew commitment, in 2018, we launched, oh, I'm so sorry, thank you. Not good with all the technology. In 2018, we launched our Renew commitment to eliminate virgin plastics from our supply chain by 2021. This would entail both our office, DC, stores, and supply chain, and also encompass polyester and nylon fibers. And we went about achieving this via upcycling post-consumer waste into our textiles and poly bags, and then partnering with suppliers that were working towards zero waste production. So step one for us was the poly bags. This has been an ongoing project for us for many years. I think poly bags can be kind of an overlooked aspect of waste in the apparel supply chain. Pretty much every single item that is made is wrapped in plastic when it is shipped from the factory to the DC, and often it is then shipped out from the distribution center to the customer still wrapped in plastic. These bags can be incredibly challenging to easily recycle on a consumer level, and more often than not are put in the trash can. So it's been our mission for a while to figure out ways to minimize the impact of the poly bags. So what we were able to do in the past few years was develop a poly bag made from 100% recycled materials. We do remove all poly bags at our distribution center, so every order that's shipped to the consumer is not wrapped in plastic. It goes straight into our cardboard mailers, and we do this because then we're able to control the stream of waste. So we collect all the poly bags and bundle them, and then we've found a partner that will upcycle them into composite lumber. We've also, on the materials side, worked towards removing the virgin polyester and nylon, and we're replacing it with 100% post-consumer or post-industrial recycled and GRS certified. Our polyester, for the most part, is post-consumer, while the nylon is post-industrial. And again, partnering with mills who are innovating both in the recycled and in biodegradable synthetics. We are hopeful in a long-term way to be able to provide some sort of solution for microfibers and shedding. I would say we are not quite there yet, but we do place an importance on minimizing the synthetic fibers within our materials portfolio. So we are really taking a stand against introducing polyester into the line as a cost alternative to, say, a silk. We really strive to only use synthetics where they are needed from a technical or performance standpoint. So after our Renew commitment, we became excited to continue using recycled materials where we can to really minimize our virgin fiber consumption. So we extended that to natural fibers as well, including our Cashmere launch this year. Cashmere has been a big part of our business since probably about 2 years after launch, and cashmere can be a somewhat troubled fiber to find a sustainable solution for. So we were very excited to partner with a mill in Italy that was working to gather post-consumer garments and then shred them and then spin them, blended with wool, into really beautiful new yarns to use in our sweaters. We also have developed and produced recycled wool, recycled down, and recycled cotton. We prioritize less complex fiber blends to hopefully promote another round of recycling in the future. It can be incredibly hard when you have very complex blends in fabrics to then pull them apart into something that is usable. So we do try to maintain much more simple blends. And then we are really excited to support textile recycling infrastructure to promote continued scalability. So some of our challenges in sourcing have, thank you. Some of our challenges in sourcing have been around stretch yarns because we're an online first business. The majority of our bottoms product especially do use stretch to help with fit and returns. So far, we have not found a real scalable solution to replace elastane. So that's been something that has been increasingly challenging as we try to move away from virgin polyester. Also in the trims, hard plastic to use in certain aspects of trims as well as certain componentry and footwear has been incredibly challenging to find. And then cost of goods. Going back to our mission, we really believe that sustainable and ethical basics should be available to everyone and not come at a premium cost. So when we do introduce more sustainable fiber choices into our line, it's very important to us to maintain a flat cost or even be able to offer it at a lower price point. So those are some of the barriers we've had in the sourcing end. And then in the scalability, I think this was touched on earlier as well, but currently there's a very high rate of consumption of cheap clothing that's not necessarily suitable for recycling back into the apparel stream. It can be highly complex blends. It can be fibers that are not currently able to be renewed into another life. We also find that when we've been researching opportunity for recycling post-consumer garments, a lot of the infrastructure is in Europe or Asia. So in the US currently, there doesn't seem to be the resources or the awareness to support recycling, collection, and processing. So as such, a lot of our infrastructure that we have been supporting exists mainly in Europe. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And again, we'll do questions after our final presenter. So please jot down your notes so you remember. Crystal Moody Wood is the founder of Material Evolve, a technical textiles consulting firm aimed at creating transformational change in the textiles and apparel industry. And through project-based consulting, developing experiential learning adventures with leaders in science and textiles, and building an inspirational community around soil, sea, and circularity, Material Evolve is leading the evolution of our material world. Crystal also serves as co-chair of the sustainability pillar of the California chapter of the AATCC. Maybe you say that as one thing. And recently led the execution moderation of a 3-day conference titled Resilient Textile Systems Through the Lens of Soil and Sea. She's also done a lot of other really cool stuff, and we'll make sure we have everyone's full bio up on our website.
Thanks. Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to be here while Kate gets that up. I see a lot of familiar faces. Holly, thank you for introducing me to these lovely folks at CalRecycle. And Hiroko, thank you for giving me my first exposure to textile recycling. This is a facility we went and visited together in San Leandro at United Textile. And I mean, I've been thrifting all my life, so I've seen how much the volume has increased just by continuing to thrift and go to vintage stores. But going to this facility and understanding that it was just a rebaling facility that then went to LA that mostly went overseas was really disheartening, because I had spent most of my career working in new materials and really developing new products. So part of this, I'd say, factors into why I started a sustainable textile consultancy more recently. So who is Materievolve? It's a technical textiles consultancy aimed at creating transformational change in textiles, footwear, and apparel. I have a colleague here, Nicole Kenny, if you want to wave. She also works with me. We both have a textile science background, so we really work mostly in materials development. A lot of the work that Nikki is doing kind of overlaps. We're a rare breed in the textile industry. Most of that's at the manufacturing level. It's not necessarily living within the brand from a technical expertise, which is why I'm able to have a consultancy. And it's only recently founded in 2018, so some of the work I'm about to describe for sustainable textile solutions will actually be overlapped with some of my background working for the North Face and VF Corporation and as a materials manager for FiberShed. Heather and Rebecca are in the audience, so they'll be able to talk even more to that later. So we do project-based consulting, developing experiential learning adventures with leaders in science and textiles. I feel it's really important to pull people out of the office and teach them about soil, get them to see these recycling facilities and really see the impact of microfiber pollution firsthand to understand what are the things we need to do moving forward to really create solutions. And then building that inspirational community around soil, sea, and circularity. So just a little bit of background of who we work with. So brands and manufacturers, Rothy's, like I said, I worked for VF Corporation in their Apparel Innovation Center, the North Face, Best Made, Vans, materials innovators like Bolt Threads and Mango Materials are coming down the pipe as we think about textile recycling, understanding once these come to commerciality, what else we need to do. I mean, this is another sort we'll have to figure out, more complexity to add. And then research and policy, FiberShed and Five Gyres, SFEI, the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and the Green Science Policy Institute, really eliminating toxics from our consumer textiles. So how do we support sustainable manufacturing and design? Increasing commitments to recycled contents. Everlane is really one of the few, and Patagonia and the North Face, who are really incorporating recycled content in a big way. And thank you to Textile Exchange for creating a standard that makes it easier to have that paper trail along the way and ensure that we have it. This was a program I developed back in 2015 where we incorporated post-industrial waste from the North Face supply chain. So it was actually the 15% cut waste from their biggest program. They sold over 1 million units a year, the Denali. It's the fleece with the woven panels that mostly college students wear. They were already using 100% recycled bottles, but we worked with the manufacturing supply chain to take that 15% waste, ship it back in the yarn containers to Yadkinville, North Carolina, where Unify had a facility to then take that cut waste, melt it down, and incorporate it into black. We actually added solution dyed color into that. Black was 60% of their program at the time, so we were able to eliminate dyeing, the need for dyeing. So there's a lot of water, chemicals, and energy. Actually, the bulk of a program for water, chemicals, and energy comes in the dyeing stage. So we were able to significantly reduce the amount of water, chemicals, and energy that went in. We believe that reinvesting in natural material systems is one of the highest priority things we need to do as an industry. We've only recently started to use more synthetics than naturals, and so we really want to shift that back. Some examples of great programs that we've worked on are the Climate Beneficial Wool Hat from FiberShed, where this program actually invested in a California rancher implementing a carbon farm plan, and that program has continued to grow into year 3 with a jacket and a scarf as well. If you want to know more about it, Heather and Rebecca Burgess are here to tell you more about it. But really thinking about soil first when we are creating programs and using natural materials as well. And then a Best Made program using hand-pulled bison fiber with a US supply chain. This was a program at a smaller scale. A lot of what we do are helping companies that are at scale rethink scale. And so when you can talk to the origin and the traceability of a materials program, it makes the program that much more special. And so in this case, this was an American bison program, wool bison blend for a sweater. We work on developing new testing and research methods. Primarily, the efforts here, we're working with AATCC, that's the American Association of Textile Colorists and Chemists, who are pulling together a group of brands and working with an EU consortium, all developing a global standard for fiber release to really understand how we can measure the release of any type of fiber off of textiles and understand if solutions we're developing, changing construction, changing the way a yarn is made, or just, polyester versus polyester, even looking at how improvements can be made and how we can measure that and all agree on the same standard. And then also working on, most of those efforts are for apparel today, but we're working with companies on the footwear method for that as well. Developing new material alternatives, I had mentioned these companies before. So previous work has been with Mango Materials and Bolt Threads. Mango Materials is a company out of the Bay Area who are taking waste methane from landfills and from wastewater treatment plants and feeding that to a naturally occurring bacteria, fermenting it in a tank and creating a biodegradable PHA or polyester type, and looking to develop textiles with that as well as injection molded plastics. Ideally, their system will be able to take that plastic right back in and create a circular system. Bolt Threads is a company out of the Bay Area as well. They are also using fermentation, feeding a sugar to a bacteria that they've genetically engineered to create something similar to spider silk. So it'd be a protein fiber. These are material alternatives that are coming down the pipe. They're things we should be watching and understanding. Like I said, investing in natural materials and what we know what to do with is going to help, particularly from the recycling standpoint. And just we are still doing testing on even what biodegradability testing looks like for natural materials. So, but this is the world I've been living the last 13 years is new materials innovation. So these were just a few examples of what's coming down the pipe. Advancing circular solutions. So here I've just got pictures of a Mango Materials tour. So really educating textile professionals. Like I said, not a lot of people that work in the textile industry have a materials person they can go to. They're typically talking to the company or the manufacturer, so they don't get this kind of granularity and technical understanding of what's going on in the process. So this is a tour we planned with AATCC, the trade organization that develops test methods but also does education, where we learned about the methane capture at the Mango Materials pilot plant. So like I said, we build experiential learning adventures and activities. Ideally, they're out in nature because that's what we're doing this for. In my bio, we mentioned the 3-day conference in October for Soil and Sea. We had 5 gyres there speaking to research around San Francisco Bay and what we know and don't know about plastic pollution and microfiber pollution. But also Fibershed speaking to, in many different ways, their work in hemp, their work in climate beneficial wool, and what reinvesting in natural fiber systems look like with a soil focus. We hosted a reuse and modularity design tour of the Houston Space Center with Amy Ross. She's a spacesuit engineer who's best known for the glove that she designed. And then there's a picture of a sail that we did with SFEI. And I think it was SFEI and our group just talking about the Soil and Sea. So it was sort of a predecessor to the Soil and Sea conference. We went sailing out on the bay. So what does building community look like? working with key universities in the C side, UC, SB, Bren, where they're doing the microfibers traceability and flow analysis, University of Toronto, where they're doing a lot of the San Francisco specific work. I went on a plastic pollution sale in Indonesia last year, seeing a lot of the trash in the Coral Triangle firsthand and doing that research there. I've been an active member of the San Francisco Bay Microplastics Policy Committee since 2018, really supporting in the best way I can, connecting more textile people for us to understand really how we can start to forensically figure out where a lot of this microfiber pollution is coming from. Because the number one thing they found in San Francisco Bay is fibers. So where is that coming from? Is it apparel? Is it laundering? Is it our carpets? And how can we minimize that? And then this is another example of an adventure with the famous Captain Charles Moore, who is famed to have found the North Pacific Gyre first. We went out on his catamaran, the Algalita, in Long Beach with a bunch of textile professionals from Vans and Patagonia, looking at research methods and understanding what they're looking at. Building community and soil. We work with key research leaders in the soil side, creating soil-focused textile programs like the community-supported cloth, and building regenerative textile value chains. Hemp is something we're really interested in. You can see from my t-shirt, hemp is legal. We think that there's a lot of potential there, but there's a lot of holistic thinking that needs to go into what we'll implement moving forward. And then building community and circularity. This morning we went on an aquafill tour and just developing more educational events for textile professionals. So thank you. If you have any questions, my email's on the bottom, but those are just some examples of what's happening in sustainable manufacturing and design, and for us to consider moving forward as we create these textile recycling solutions.
Thanks, Crystal. And before I give it to the audience, can you briefly tell us what Aquafill, what that company does?
Yeah, so Aquafill is a company that's based out of Slovenia. They're Italian. Giulio Benazzi is the founder. So this morning we went to a local facility that's being put in Woodland for carpet recycling. Echo Neil is the brand name. You'll see Patagonia, Outerknown. Do you guys use Echo Neil? Everlane, using recycled nylon in their products. A lot of that recycled nylon is either from the carpet industry or I think it's a combined, so it's from ocean plastic as well as carpet as a combined input. And so we went to the facility this morning in Woodland.
Very cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Now we're going to open it up to audience questions. And so please, if you have a question, raise your hand and someone will bring you a microphone. And we have some on, okay. Let's do one from the audience first, and then we'll switch to maybe a couple online.
Hello, my name's Alexa. I'm with Department of the Environment. I think this question would be good for Nikki from Everlane. You talked a little bit about your company utilizing recycled content and the U.S. not having the facilities needed to do that technology. What exactly is that process? If you could talk a little bit more about the actual technology. Is it de-threading? And what is it that we need here in California in order to move the needle? Thank you.
I think from my perspective, it would kind of be a two-pronged approach. I think there's a lot of opportunity for more robust understanding of how to dispose of textiles here in the US, and having a very clear collection stream for that. When we've done research with our partners in Europe, we've found that, especially when we were researching recycled down, we found that there is actually, it's just more of a common practice to place your duvets or your pillows in there's somewhere to place them instead of the trash. It's a more well-established practice. So because of that, then whether it be the textile or the down recycling processor, has a clear input stream of where to purchase from. We do, even though we have everything GRS certified, we do try to have our own direct transparency down the supply chain. So we have visited a lot of the mills that are doing the final knitting or weaving, and then we've gone to the kind of all the way back to the recycling separators. What we've found is that while they're buying a small portion, most likely from the US, but probably funneling through India, a large majority is coming from European collection. So I think mainly what I was referring to, I think as kind of the easier step in the US is just more education on what to do with your textiles as opposed to throwing it in the landfill. Kind of what we've seen with our consumers is that once it's out of their hands, they sort of stop thinking about the impact that it has. And honestly, often once they've purchased it from a brand, they've stopped thinking about the impact that it has. So I think there's a lot of education that can be done around the, I can't think of what the term of it is right now, but the at-home, the use phase, and then also the disposability.
Let's take one online question.
Okay, the first question is pretty general. The question's from Shanna McCracken at Green MBA 4-Hour Fashion. What information does the latest California waste characterization study show in relation to textiles? Any segmentation, for example, pre-consumer versus post, fiber type, sources broken down further than residential versus commercial, et cetera?
I will take that. 2014 waste characterization study was the one that's released now. We're working on 2018. I believe, I think in 2014 it does, I think it might be just clothing. I don't know if it breaks it down by fiber type. I think there might be a little more segmentation in the 2018, and that should be released this year. I'm sorry, in 2020, early 2020. Analyzing those results right now, so just keep an eye out for that, and we're excited to get updated numbers on textiles in the waste stream. Yeah, thanks. Maybe an audience question?
Thank you. My name is Heather Podol from FiberShed. Really grateful for this panel. Thank you to all the speakers for sharing the important work you're doing. I have a question for Trini, and maybe it's a little bit broader than the presentation you just gave specifically, but I'm really interested in hearing Textile Exchange's perspective on Tracy's introduction talked about the microplastic impacts of the textile waste stream and what we do know about how much microfiber is going into our bodies of water. And there's a lot of recent research that's starting to come up, as Crystal mentioned. And Nikki, it was really interesting to hear you talk about Everlane's prioritization whenever possible to use natural materials because you're thinking about that impact. So I'm curious about Textile Exchange playing this really important role in verifying and monitoring and helping companies prioritize those fiber choices, and how you're processing all this new information that's coming in about microfiber. Because on the one hand, circularity and recycling of plastic into clothing seemed like a great idea when it started, but we're getting more and more information about why that can be problematic and more complex and maybe something that we need to minimize. So I'm curious how you're thinking about that as an institution that helps people make those choices. And I know this isn't directly related to verification, so maybe it's a little outside of what you are ready to comment on. Yeah, preferred materials, and just how you're integrating that as an organization that plays such an important role in what choices companies make.
Mm-hmm. So the overarching approach is a little bit outside of my expertise, but from the standards perspective, the way we design the standards is with the industry for the industry. So while life happens all around us. We don't design these standards at a vacuum and come up with ideas and say, hey, this sounds great. It's really, we try to put our best foot forward. We have international working groups that everybody is free to join as we revise our standards to make sure that the latest thinking is really included. In terms of the preferred fiber, the market report is really a very, very rich and heavy, and I wish I had hyperlinked it in my presentation, and I didn't. So if you cannot find it on the website, email me. But it shows really a lot of great information on, first of all, how we define preferred fiber and the breadth of it, how it's being used, where it's being sourced. So it is a really, really great report that I encourage people to read. It's a hefty report beyond lunchtime reading, but it's well worth it.
Hi, I think I have. Hi, my name is Patty Breslin, and I'm with the Reuse Alliance. And my question is around and I don't know who would be the best person to answer this, but it's about the use of plastic in general in fiber and the thinking around whether or not this is any sort of, in the future, this is actually encouraging the use of plastic in our system, and whether, because there's another use for it rather than trying to eliminate plastic from the materials, web, which I'm sure is far in the future, but whether or not, I see a lot about single-use plastic bottles, and we're now using those for textiles. So have we thought forward about what the impacts this will be in the plastics industry in general?
I'm happy to comment on it. I haven't seen a report related to that. I think it's a great question. Today, it's a byproduct. I mean, this is coming from the food industry, where my understanding is textiles is actually a great second use because the quality isn't of the standard that you would need for food again. So it's the next loop. But I think in a circularity system, we also want to think about, we're touting circular solutions and recycled polyester, but we still don't have the facilities to put it back into textiles again. And so really, as we think about the future of this, ideally, we aren't having to produce more virgin at all, and we can just continue to cycle within the same system. There was a question earlier about what are the sort of technical steps and processes in recycling for textiles. And I think we'll probably hear a little bit more about that later because I see Isaac in the room. But essentially there's mechanical or chemical. Today, most of textile recycling is a mechanical process, which is essentially just shredding up the textiles, which is shortening the fiber length, whether it's filament fiber, so long continuous filament that we use mostly for polyester product. We actually chop it in manufacturing to be similar to cotton when we blend it in a first product for cotton polyester. And then cotton tends to be a 2.5-inch length staple, and it gets even shorter, sometimes down to even 1 inch. And that's where you get sub-quality product and more shedding. So as we understand the impacts of shedding related to textiles or fiber release, cotton could be an issue as well. So there are so many complex things we need to think about as we design for the future. I think that's a great call out. I saw a recent article actually about that textiles could potentially be producing more demand in the future, but there's so much recycled plastics out there, so many bottles, single use today, that it's my belief that textiles is a great second use for now. But this is just a Band-Aid. We really need to move forward and reinvest in natural fiber systems that are thinking about ecosystems and soil health and ocean health.
Let's do an online, then we'll transition back to audience.
Okay, this one is from Cecilia Hands at Guess. It's for Nikki. She says, working at a fashion brand, I find that sustainability is very complex and sometimes difficult to communicate to customers. What communication strategies have you found are most successful in engaging consumers?
That's an interesting question because we do find that a lot of our consumers engage with us via Instagram these days. And in the past year, some of our highest engaged and highest commented on posts, whether they are positive or negative reactions, have been around sustainability. So I think our strategy has always been to be as honest and direct with our consumer around what we believe in and give them as much information as we can and allow them to make their own choice. Ultimately, everyone has different aspects that they prioritize, and not everyone's going to agree that we're doing the right thing at all times. And honestly, it's such a quickly evolving field within environmental sustainability that we want to stay as nimble as possible with the extremely small team we have and be really open to adapting. So something that we may come out for today or tomorrow, a year down the road, we may completely reverse our stance on. And I think that's something that we've really tried to be conscious of with our plastics commitment. To your point, it seems that right now we are so far from using up all of the plastics that could be recycled that it does seem like a valid solution for now, but we definitely don't see it as a long-term one. It's just a first step for us. So I think with everything we do, we try to be as direct and honest to the brand as we can, and the consumer tends to react.
Another audience question?
Kevin Miller, City of Napa. I came a little bit late, so I don't know if Tracy touched on it in her presentation, but I wondered what kind of recovery rate historically has there been for the pre-consumer? Obviously, we're going to want to tackle the post-consumer, but were they already recovering pre-consumer, kind of like they do with paper waste, or was that getting landfilled as well?
I'm looking down at my panel.
Are you
of
talking
experts here.
California specifically or as a textile industry?
Are you talking about like writ
I
large?
think California first and then more globally.
Okay. You want to go first? Let's go
Well,
local to global.
I would just say it's one of the things that we've heard about that is somewhat low-hanging fruit in that there are scraps from the manufacturing process, and so we do have the term for it is escaping me, but where I think it's Zero Waste Daniel, for example, creates his rolls of fabric from those scraps from the industrial or the manufacturing process, and then makes other garments from that. But I think that I'm not sure if that's really a trend or more of sort of a one-off. And I know it's one of the first things that I heard about from, I think it was Patagonia a number of years ago, as being something that definitely is an issue. So I'm not sure if someone else has something they could lend to that.
Yeah, I think we would consider that post-industrial scrap. So whether it's cutting waste from the floor, which as an average 15% across the board when you've got extra small through extra large that you're all cutting from the same width of goods, you see about 15% on the floor. Some programs worse than that. It really depends. Most brands are looking at margin more than anything else. You also see there's a lot because we're planning overseas. We've got these really long, 100-day or more lead times on product. A lot of times we're projecting out way larger volumes than we're actually making from clothing. So you've got a lot of extra at factories that are left over. So I'm seeing a lot from an industry perspective where you're seeing sort of off-ends, or I'm forgetting the term too, but it's essentially sort of leftovers from these large production runs that then smaller designers are able to use. Zero waste pattern making is starting to become a little bit more prevalent. That was something that FiberShed with Dan DeSanto, who was working at the North Face, but also with FiberShed, the Backyard Project actually went after that the North Face program created. And that was really going after a size medium at 100% usage, and then across the board, how could we fit the pattern so we could use as much as that fabric as possible? And we were able to improve on that program, because that program, I was at the North Face at the time when it started. We were able to improve to an 89% usage, so 11% waste. But it was all colored cotton and all natural materials, so not something you have to think about as much. But so there's all these different levels of post-industrial. You even have post-industrial fiber fluff left over after you're making a fleece jacket, for example. Many of the fleece manufacturers are capturing that fiber and then sending it off to another industry, compacting it into these little pucks and sending it off. That's a really state-of-the-art factory that does that. So there are lots of different areas for post-industrial. My question to you is, did you mean post-consumer from a California perspective, where we're actually, and global, where we're collecting textiles and apparel? I see you shaking your head.
No, I was asking about the
post-industrial.
Post-industrial, pre-consumer. I don't know if those are synonymous terms or not.
Got it.
But how much of that was actually being wasted, or how much was actually being recovered in some fashion?
Yeah, so it's not a lot. I don't know what the percentage is, but you're seeing it advertised more, but it's still not a lot. There are a lot of companies that are just sitting on inventory of fabric that didn't get used, and maybe they're creating programs out of it, but and maybe it's going to their outlets, for example, but there's still a lot of extra out there that can be used.
Also, too, at the mill level, at the yarn and fabric manufacturing level, there's quite a bit of waste. We see a lot of the more premium mills starting to incorporate that back into their process. So a lot of our denim suppliers, if they have cotton yarns that were seconds for some reason, they will break it back down and put it back through with virgin cotton. So we are starting to see it, but it does require cleaner facilities, more investment to set up the procedures. So I would say, again, it's a small fraction of the industry that's doing it.
Thanks. Now let's take about 1 to 2, depending how fast they are, the questions from the crowd. And sorry, we'll get to the online questions at breaks and try to get back to you and in the audience. But just 1 or 2 more.
I think this gentleman has his hand out for a long time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And I want to thank you guys for setting up this, conference or panel. I've heard you guys talk about education. How do we, educate the population to be aware of, textile waste? I think 15 to 20 years ago, before CalRecycle, it was a California Integrated Management Waste Board. Textile was not even recognized as a waste. And I'm glad that, in the past few years or so, textile has become, has been recognized as, part of the waste that we generate. And so most of us in this room, if not all of us, learned about recycling, and there were very few items: paper, plastic, bottles. Those were the things that, in primary school or secondary school, we were taught that these things are recyclable, put them here, put them here. And today, we don't even have an integrated program for textiles. So my question is directed to CalRecycle. First of all, I believe that we need a huge battalion of people out there educating the young generation, be it a school program, where people who understand this subject at a very, design a program where you teach these kids, all over California. I mean, I care about the United States, but, the resistance is going to be fierce. But I believe that in California, we can do that. We are the fifth largest economy in the world. A fifth of the U.S. Economic production or consumption actually takes place in California. So California need to lead. And CalRecycle, I believe, I don't know what you guys are doing, so I'm not saying this to criticize CalRecycle, but I think that an integrated program can be designed where we go to the schools and teach these kids when they are little. That's where you catch them. It's difficult to start teaching me at my age to change something that I've been used to all my life, and I think that's the problem. Our generation is doing the best that they could do, but when it comes to this thing, sometimes I feel that we are like a lost generation. So why not start young, get these kids, educate them through this whole process, and by the time they get to our age, all of these problems that we don't have solutions for, these kids will find solutions for them if you start early. So that's what I want to suggest to CalRecycle. And a lot of companies that are doing the recycling right now, whether it's taking it to the third world countries or finding other ways, they are doing it by themselves, literally. And I've seen people go bankrupt recycling. So CalRecycle, I believe, need to come up with an incentive. Okay, every industry in the United States, in California, get some kind of incentive to do what they are doing. And recycling is that industry that I think is neglected. And then when we have a crisis where China says, we don't want your recyclables, then we start scrambling for solutions. When if we went back from the beginning and provide these incentives, sustainable incentive, these companies are going to survive whatever hardship or problem that emerge in the recycling industry.
Thank you so much for your comments, and it really makes me also think about this afternoon about a World Cafe, and we're going to be talking about and brainstorming different approaches to things, and so please stay for that because we're going to be taking everything that we hear today and coming up with a summary report as well as a strategy that we'll be working on. So I really appreciate your comments, and we'll definitely be including that as a suggestion moving forward.
And with that, I'm sorry, everyone, but we're going to have to end this panel. So if we could give a round of applause to our panelists. And we're going to take like a quick stretch break while we transition to panel 2. So feel free to get up, use the restroom, and no more than 5 minutes. Please be back. And we're going to start. Thanks so much.